Okay, hi. This is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight, and tonight I'm going to be talking about our lawsuit at the nuclear waste on the beach lawsuit, and also our paper that we submitted for the seismic study that they presented at the last CEP meeting. And then I will open it up for questions. So basically, what I want to do here is show a couple of things that I had prepared as I go through this. Now, if you're just on the phone, you won't be able to see what I'm referring to necessarily, but it should be something that that we can go over. So basically, first I'm just going to talk about our case. And in October of 2015, the California Coastal Commission approved a permit to put the 3.6 million pounds of high-level nuclear waste on the beach within 100 feet of the seawall. And this is a really ridiculous place for this because it is, of course, subject to all the risks that we can think of in terms of being near earthquake faults, being next to the ocean, and being next to 8.4 million people, being next to a superhighway. And really, probably the largest threat is maybe a terrorist threat, because it could be hit with a conventional weapon and taken out there on the beach. Now, the Coastal Commission has a responsibility to review this type of a project, and there's really no way that they should have approved this without additional review of other options. And that's really the center point of our case, is that they did not review other options before they decided on this one, just because it was super convenient right there at the plant. Now, these plants are placed next to the ocean because they need to use the ocean cooling seawater. And the fact is that you don't need to have ocean seawater for the ISFSI, so you don't need to be near the ocean at all. And so I thank everybody that has joined in. I'm giving a summary of the lawsuit. So this lawsuit is based on the fact that they didn't investigate anything else, and the way the attorney firm, which is Aguirre and Severson, they have targeted what they consider the most likely alternative option, which is the Palo Verde location. Now, the Palo Verde location, if you may remember, is let me just go to and so we can see it on the screen here for those who have visuals here. The Palo Verde station, I'm going to do the maps, is near Phoenix, but way out in the desert, and it's kind of it's a fairly easy spot to let's see. Okay, there it is from the air. It's past pretty far past the Colorado River, as we see. This is the main area of Phoenix over here to the right, if you have it on your screen, but this is being recorded so you can view it later if you're on the phone. So it is just to the west of Phoenix, about I don't know, 20 miles or so. And as you look in the big picture here, it's about the same distance Well, a little bit less from the border of California into Arizona. It's quite a ways in. And so that means it's past the San Andreas Fault, and it's quite a ways off of the, away from the Colorado River. It's already a nuclear plant. They already have nuclear fuel there. It's partially owned by Southern California Edison. And so this is the reason that even though we're not saying that this has to be the ultimate solution, here in this picture, if you're viewing it, you can see just off to the side of the plant, this area right here, this is their existing spent fuel storage installation. And you can see these canisters are actually the kind that just sit on the ground. They look like a big barrel. You know, they're a cylinder. And they have this big pad for a place to put it. So this would be an area which would be fairly easy to expand away from many of the risks that we find in San Onofre. So our lawsuit, the hearing will be on the 30th of March, according to the current plan, in San Diego. So if you can put up on your schedule, if you're in San Diego and can make it, it would be an interesting thing to go to. We were looking for letters of support in our last call. I talked to Mike Aguirre about this, and he kind of sort of poo-pooed the idea and didn't really want that. He says it's not going to help, and he doesn't really want a lot of, you know, protesting or anything like that, because right now we have the court going in our direction, and we want to keep them going in that direction because they're currently supporting us. So we don't want to be, you know, irritating them at all. But I do think having people in the courtroom is always a good thing, because then the court knows this is an important case and people are interested. So we're going to want to make sure we set aside March 30th for that hearing, and I'll try to keep everybody updated. Now, so that's sort of the big picture. Now, when Mike first started this, I said, well, why don't we put some other options on there? And there were some other options that I did suggest. We did look into out in the desert, the Mojave Desert, and I'll kind of show you where it is here if you're viewing this. Out in the Mojave Desert is still in California, is on the North American plate. So it is away from the movements of the Pacific plate. And I thought out here in the desert would be a good place for it. But as I further investigated this, I discovered that the site that I had originally chosen, which actually is next to a railroad line, is just too remote for a good site, because really you don't want this too remote, because it needs to be secured. It needs to be fenced off and secured. You need personnel there. You need to have power and so forth. So as I investigated this further, I realized that was just too remote, and it would have to be sited somewhere else. And also we discovered this place called Cadiz, which is an interesting little place where they have quite a bit of agriculture going on this site. Fruit trees and stuff. They've been somehow getting water there. But what was more concerning is right next to us was this Amboy crater, which is a cinder cone which erupted not that long ago, approximately 10,000 years ago, which on geologic time is not that much. And so the point is that we may have another eruption in the area. And of course, that would be a very bad thing if we happen to put the nuclear waste right on top of a future volcano. Now, this is supposed to be a temporary site, you know, where they're going to only store it for a short time. But you know how things go. Once they put it in the ground, it's going to be very hard to move it. Now, I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about the paper that I just put together called A Prudent View of Earthquake Risks, Nuclear Plants, and Nuclear Waste Along the California Coast. This was in response to the recent community engagement panel meeting where they had scientists from Scripps Institution of Oceanography providing the results of their multi-year study looking over the basically the fault lines near the nuclear plant area there at SONGS, what they call the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, or they use the cute word of SONGS. And the results of this study were, the way they presented it were quite amazing, because what they did was they actually had two theories that they put forward. One, which was the main fault line, which is right off of the, basically right off of the coast. Let me go to the picture here. Which in their view, and for those of you that are looking, you can see the where SONGS is here is, and I think maybe you can't see my cursor, I'm not sure, but there is the plant SONGS, and then right next to it is this Newport Inglewood Rose Canyon fault zone, and it has 4 sections, and the end points are very close to each other, within 2 kilometers each one. This is right off of the coast, and they decided that this fault line had the potential to provide a 7.4 magnitude quake. And then they also analyzed another theoretical hidden fault line, and they decided that and if that fault line existed, then the potential would be even higher. But what they did was they said, oh, well, that other fault line, we've proven that it doesn't exist, so it's safer than we thought it might be. And so then the news picked up, San Onofre, safer than they thought it was. You know, it's safer. But really, that was just a bad theory. So they did this in order to cover it. What a sneaky way to provide a bogus, you know, result that essentially, you know, they basically are covering up the fact that it's a 7.4 magnitude quake zone, which should have shut down, the plant should have been shut down with that information if it was still running, because it was designed only for 7.5, and that's just too close for comfort. So I invite you to read this this document, and I'll just tell you basically the concept here is that even though they're making good progress with understanding seismic risk and earthquake theory, this whole scientific area has only been around for about 50 years. The plate tectonic theory first was recognized as true in 1964 when the 9.4 or 9.2 magnitude Alaska earthquake erupted and really devastated that area. And that's when the United States said, gee, we got to get serious about understanding earthquake risks. And at the time, they didn't understand the plate tectonics or why that quake was happening. They did know about this concept of continental drift in general. But ever since then, we've had this really strong theory about how the plates are moving around. And so we've gotten some more information now in this project that they did, which is funded by Southern California Edison. They analyzed using sounding equipment on a ship. So the ship would drive back and forth off the coast and do soundings. I'm not sure exactly how it happens, but maybe they're little mini explosions. And then those vibrations go down onto the earth and reflect back, and they can see through those reflections what exists down below the earth, below the surface of actually the bottom of the ocean at that point. So they have these very detailed images, and then they sit down and they try to figure out where the fault lines are and to understand them and so forth. So this is one of the most detailed projects like this in history. The trouble with this type of project is that even though they're getting better, they really don't have any way to predict earthquakes or know how large they might be. You know, we've only been doing this for 50, 100 years, and these earthquakes may sometimes be much, much stronger than we would ever imagine. Because they're so long, it takes hundreds of years for any event to happen, and then it happens in the matter of seconds or minutes. So it's hard to capture that and get the data. So it's very difficult because it's mostly an observational science. You can't make experiments and test theories. So basically they're left with peer review, which has been shown to be frequently misleading, especially if you have the high propensity for people to have a bias due to the high value, the economic value of these plants. Now they put the plants in, and now they need to somehow prove that it's okay for them to stay there. And so they'll hire you if you can do that. So the people that get hired are the ones who can say it's okay. And if they figure out that at an area, say at Songs, they say the potential is a 7.4, that's not a maximum. That's just an idea of what might happen. And it may actually be a lot more than that, and maybe less. It may be 0 for a long time, but the 7.4 is just a wild guess based on what they've seen. Now, the implications of a nuclear accident at this site would be super devastating. And, you know, we've seen these with Fukushima, the triple meltdown. It's still ongoing disaster. Even a low probability event can be a huge catastrophe. And so to say there's no risk, or, you know, to somehow judge it with an estimate of what the risk is, and you multiply it out, because this is what they do. They say the consequences of a disaster are really big, but the likelihood is really small. So they multiply a really small number by a really big number. And guess what happens when those are both estimates? It could be anywhere at that point. So really, you know nothing. And so the risk assessment models that they've used are not useful in this case. If we store nuclear waste at San Onofre, it can remain dangerous for 2,500 centuries. It's a very long time. And so to even think that it's a smart thing to do in this location is insane. They have what they call a generic environmental impact statement, which has been something that the Department of Energy produced that allows them to put one of these isophyses pretty much anywhere in the country, and they say it's allowed anywhere you want. And that's just absurd, especially in this location. They should not be able to use these generic environmental impact statements. What they wanted to do was set it up so the nuclear industry could get out of doing anything else. They could just store it on site. Now what they do is they have one number that they figured out so that they can design something that will be able to survive a quake. So they take that Richter scale and then decide how far away they are from the quake and how much the ground will be moving. And then they put that into the peak ground acceleration. And that's one number that really doesn't represent what happens in an earthquake, which can have all kinds of vibrations and It depends on how long it lasts. I mean, it's not just the peak, it's how long it lasts, and actually vibrational energy can be stored in systems and put back, just like a swing set. If you push it a little bit, it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger if you push it at the right rate. So with all this said, what it comes down to is that you really can't trust anything that the earthquake scientists say. And we realize that earthquakes can be super devastating. So, but how devastating can they be? And basically, is there an upper limit to what can happen? And really, there is no upper limit, because at any place you could have a volcano erupt and then lava come out and pretty much dissolve anything that you built. Mankind cannot deal with a volcano. We can't deal with them at all. So we pretty much have to just let that lava go wherever it wants. If it's coming out, we have to move out of the way. But putting that case aside, there is probably an upper limit to how much shaking can happen in an earthquake, because it's just boundaries of the earthquake crust, of the Earth's crust, moving against each other, and you're going to have some shaking, and maybe very violent, but it's only going to get so high. The largest earthquakes on Earth were at this point at 9.5 magnitude. They had one in Chile at that level. They had the 9.4 in Alaska. And if you look at the history of these quakes, there's 8.0s all the time. So there's some very big earthquakes. They usually happen along the boundaries of the plates. Of course, the Ring of Fire is right here in the Pacific Ocean. All around the Pacific is where we have most of the quakes. In fact, 90% of the earthquakes occur around the Pacific Ocean, and 81% of the largest earthquakes occur there. If you look at the map of the United States, along California all the way up the coast to Washington is bright red, and it means it's extreme danger in this area. So you would never in your right mind put any kind of nuclear storage facility at this location. Secondly, you have tsunami risk. Now, tsunamis can be extremely devastating, but you know what? It's not that hard to avoid a tsunami. You just go further inland and not put it right on the coast. The San Onofre area isn't in a tsunami inundation area, and the way they've decided they're going to put this thing in, the thing we're fighting in court, is only inches over the water table, and this is a water table that's rising due to climate change. So the conclusion that I come here to with the other reviewers that I had on this was that, forget debating about whether the earthquake is a 7.4 or not. If you're going to put nuclear waste anywhere, it has to be designed for probably a 10.0 magnitude, so that we're above anything that we've ever seen before with a margin. And then you also have to design it, if you're going to do that, with very sophisticated computer analysis to try to find out about this vibration analysis that they normally don't even do. Obviously, I'll read this, a prudent approach, given the ultimate danger of a nuclear plant or nuclear waste storage facility, is to simply avoid this location altogether. And, it'd be really expensive to try to build some sort of rigid structure that would actually survive an earthquake. Way more expensive than just moving it somewhere else. Now, guess what? They say, well, we can design it so that it will survive an earthquake, but they couldn't even design their own steam generator so that they could survive. So what makes you think that we can trust engineers to do this? We can't. These seismic studies tend to give us false security, because they say, okay, we think a 7.4 might happen here, and then the engineers say, well, we'll design for a 7.5. Are you kidding me? That's just a wild guess that it could be a 7.4. That you can't just design barely over that and say you're safe. But that's what goes on. This plant also was originally designed for 6.0. And then they upgraded it to a 7.0. and later to 7.5. But these upgrades are not really any changes to the plant. What they are is people, I call sharpening the pencil, where they go in and they say, well, we've decided that it's, you know, with the 7.5, the vibrations really don't make it to us because it has to go through this type of rock, and so we're safe. So really, it's a way to lie to ourselves. Luckily, this plant is shut down. And this study that Neil Driscoll came up with from Scripps Institution would be enough, I believe, to shut down the plant had it been still operating. But fortunately, we don't have to fight that battle. It's already shut down, but now we're dealing with this waste. The proposed ISFAC is right next to the ocean, only 100 feet from the seawall, just inches over the groundwater level. It's insane. It's another issue is the corrosion that happens along the coast. If you've ever lived on the coast, you know that everything corrodes like crazy. And they're putting stainless steel canisters that are thin, 5/8 of an inch thick, and really, really big though. So these canisters are about the size of a school bus. They're 5/8 of an inch thick, so they're super heavy and actually very, very hot most of the time. As soon as they get down below 85 degrees centigrade, which is like 150 degrees Fahrenheit, they will start to collect a little bit of salt and get what they call it's basically chloride-induced corrosion. One of the issues that's difficult here is these canisters are too big to transport and store. They've found out that they're just too big and too hot to put in any kind of facility like Yucca Mountain. So we're kind of stuck with this interim solution somewhere of leaving them outside so that they can cool off for quite a number of years and decades. It means that this nuclear waste will be sitting around the country at virtually hundreds of locations where terrorists can just throw a little you know, explosive over there and will have devastation. Maybe I don't like to talk about that because it's such an absurd thing that we're left with here. This nuclear industry is a mess. So the bottom line is we must reconsider our options. And this is what this lawsuit is all about, is reconsidering the options. And again, the key option that we're looking at, because we wanted to focus on one, was the location in at the Palo Verde plant near Phoenix. And the reason that one is chosen in the lawsuit and not a whole bunch of different ones, is because Mike Aguirre said it's better just to choose like your best option that looks viable. The reason this one looks most viable is because it already is a nuclear plant. It already has nuclear waste there. So we're not going to damage any new spot. This is the thing that I found. Like if I go out to the desert looking for a spot to put nuclear waste, there really isn't any place that you can find that's bad enough, you know, so that you can say, oh, that place is so bad that we should make it a nuclear waste dump. Every place has its own beauty. But this spot here has already been, you know, irradiated with the plant. It makes sense to at least review it. Another option that I want to just mention, which is not as good, but it's better than doing nothing, is to look at moving it inland. If you look here at the, for people that have their computer up, here's the San Onofre plant. Let's see, where is it? Up a little bit further. There it is. San Onofre, right on the coast. Okay. And inland, a little ways, in Camp Pendleton. And there's a spot in here, probably in this area, where it's maybe 3 miles in, out of the way of whatever they're doing. I think I was looking in this area here, just as an example. and I'm not sure exactly where to put it in Camp Pendleton, because there'd be some wrestling match there with Navy about where this Department of the Navy owns the site, owns this facility. And so the Navy would then have the say because they're in charge of this site and they own the lease for the plant. So we would have to, as some people know, the Marines actually is part of the Navy. At least in this case, the Marine base is actually run by the Navy. So inland about 3 miles would be a good place to perhaps move this fuel so it'll be away from the ocean. Now, it doesn't eliminate the earthquake risk. It doesn't eliminate, it reduces, I think, terrorist threat, because you don't have the entry point from the ocean just to swim up there and throw, you know, a missile at it or something. It is in an area that's controlled by the military and would be able to be carefully protected. So that is another option that's not as good because it leaves it in this earthquake zone, but would be better than right on the coast where it is. It'd be away from, a little bit further away from the salt air. Okay, so that is where I'm going to stop blabbing for right now. I'm going to quickly stop. We're going to want to thank everybody. I'm not turning off the call. I'm just going to